Most phones these days, if they are boasting of solid camera specs, they sure are using a Sony sensor. So when Sony themselves make a phone, their own flagship, an expensive camera-focused flagship, it should be the best camera phone in the market, right? Well, let's see what Sony's done. If this is your first time here, or in case you just can't remember, my name's Ash, you're watching C4E Tech, and this is my full review of the Sony Xperia 1 Mark 6. Let's get started. Now guys, I have very conflicting feelings about the Xperia 1 Mark 6. It's almost like I have two voices in my head arguing. Sony's done really well. They've abandoned that gimmicky 4K display. Hold up. Now that is something they should have done a whole while back. It's actually kind of stupid that you guys have been positive about that 4K but not really 4K panel for all this long. The display, it's now a more common aspect ratio, meaning it's easier to use, it feels more familiar to other phones we are seeing out there. And the Full HD AMOLED panel is actually quite nice. It's also quite a bright panel. It's got a peak brightness of 1500 nits under auto mode, which is fine. But once again, it's something they should have done a long time back. For the price they're asking, the phone needs to be exceptional, not just on par. We aren't giving away participation trophies now, are we? Well, the Mark 6 is a whole lot better. It doesn't heat up. None of the heating issues we saw on the older Xperias exist here. How many 4K videos did we shoot? It never got hot, right? And all those video calls we were on, remember how hot the Xperias used to get when we were on video calls? None of those issues exist here. The phone, they've improved it a lot. I mean, you've seen the throttling, right? Thermal management on this phone is definitely not great. Yes, in the past, it used to heat and throttle. Now, it only throttles. And it never locked us to 60 Hz as older Xperias would. Isn't that great? Yeah, great, sure. But once again, these are things Sony should have fixed like 5 years back. These are bugs that haven't existed on any of the competition like forever. So it's great that Sony's finally decided to fix them, sure. But fixing bugs that haven't existed on anything else ever, now that doesn't make Sony great again, does it? What more do you want? People don't buy these phones to game on. Sony doesn't call these gaming phones. They don't market it as gaming phones. Well, except that one time that they did. Shut up! I'm sure you get what I'm saying. These are phones people buy for those cameras, for that clean Android experience. I mean, 3+4 update policy on a phone priced this high? It used to be 2+3. They added an entire year. Will you never be freaking happy? And Google and Samsung offer 7. What's your point? I mean, there is a 3+4 for a phone priced this high. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. And those cameras, yes, those cameras. Now the triple camera setup here is quite similar to what we saw on the 1 Mark 5. We have a primary, ultrawide and a telephoto with continuous optical zoom. The sensors are pretty much the same, but there are some differences with the cameras. For starters, the telephoto, it has a longer reach. It can now go from 3.5x to 7.1x instead of 5.2 like last time. While this sounds great on paper, there are some issues. Now, let's see 3.5x side by side with the Galaxy S24 Ultra. When you zoom in, you notice that images taken with the Xperia are cleaner. Like look here, above the number plate. The noise on the S24 Ultra, it's not there on the Sony. But when you look at other areas, like for example the grass behind, Samsung just has more detail. Now the selling point for Sony here is that from 3.5x to 7.1x on the Xperia, you get continuous optical zoom instead of digital crops. But as you zoom in, the image gets softer to the point where it's not really better than what's on the competition. Okay, let's look at 5x. Now this is Samsung using native zoom 5x, and Samsung is actually doing better. But when we switch to 7.1x, where Sony is still optical, but Samsung is digitally cropping in, there is no competition here, right? There's just an awful lack of detail on the Xperia 1 Mark 6. Once again, here, when we zoom in, just look at that text. When your selling point is we got optical zoom, which is gonna give you more detail than a digital crop, this is not good. And it only gets worse when the ambient light goes down. Now to be fair, I think this is largely due to Sony's software processing not being as mature as Samsung's, and I feel that is what makes potentially strong hardware lose out. Anyways, moving on, this time Sony's included a telephoto macro option. For some weird reason, this needs manual focusing, but I didn't really mind it since they also provide focus peaking, which really helps. I was able to get some interesting results, and I think the telephoto macros here are absolutely beautiful. Also, the ultrawide this time has an auto macro, so you get in close in the app and it automatically toggles macro mode via the ultrawide. And the ultrawide itself performs more or less similarly to the last time, and it's no surprise really since, like I said, the sensors remain unchanged. The primary too, it's the same 52 megapixel sensor from the last time, the IMX888, and it does really well. But for the life of me, I don't understand why Sony doesn't put in their 1-inch sensor, which is already in its second generation. You know, it is their camera focused flagship after all. Now, even with a smaller sensor under good lighting, this is exceptional. The images, they were very well detailed, excellent colors and dynamic range. I had fun with this camera. As always, the two-stage shutter, it just makes the whole experience so much better. Now, honestly, screw assistants, just give me a two-stage shutter key on every phone. Now guys, when the light starts to dip late evening, where phones are still relying on hardware more than software magic, Sony keeps up. The images are excellent. But here's where the cracks kind of start to show. Like, look at the light here. Highlight control is better implemented on the S24 Ultra, and to be honest, the S24 Ultra is not even the best at this, right? If you want to look at the best, check out my video on the Vivo X100 Ultra. I'll leave a card here. Now, as things get darker and the importance of processing increases, Sony kinda sorta stays competitive, but the S24 Ultra clearly gets ahead. Sony's night algorithm is not very good. Forget the S24 Ultra, this is the Xperia 1 Mark 6 side by side with the Realme GT6, a phone that costs a fraction of what the Xperia does. But when things are really dark, the Realme outperforms the Xperia. Easy. Again, here's where I feel if Sony had gone with, say, the Lite 900, the hardware, the sheer size of the sensor could have compensated for their software shortcomings. Anyways, moving on, the app itself is new. Instead of multiple apps we used to get, Sony is not unified at all, and this interface, it feels familiar, similar to what you'd find on other phones. But this app, it is a work in progress. For example, it doesn't have a pro mode for video yet. You do get one for stills, and Sony mentioned pro video should be added in the future via an OTA, but as of now, it's not there. And talking about video, you max out at 4K 120. Personally, I don't really care about 8K, so I'm not complaining. The 4K footage was very good, and more importantly, the phone stayed relatively cool while shooting. It did not continuously throw up heating notifications as it used to, at least not as often anymore. And this clip in particular, 4K 120, shot indoors when my cats were playing. Apologies for the messy room, I did not shoot this with an intention of putting it in the video, but just look at this, curtains closed, mediocre lighting, see how clean the footage is. This Xperia is amazing for video. And they've also included some nice features, like there's this product showcase option which prioritizes what's closer to the screen than faces. There's also a bokeh video option, basically portrait video, not too bad. The selfie camera also remains unchanged, and frankly it does a great job. The skin tones are natural, there's good dynamic range, the selfies are sharp. You can also shoot 4K 60 stabilized video, and there's also a portrait video option, though that takes you down to 1080-30. Now there is one thing we agree on. The fact that this is a pretty cool device. This is the RG Cube from video sponsor Anbernic. It's got a processor capable of emulating PS2 and GameCube quite well. It runs on Android, so you can play native non-emulated games if you want to. It's a pretty compact handheld, and I personally see it as a portable PS2. In typical Anbernic fashion, it's got good ergonomics, those Hall sensor analog sticks, a 4-inch 720p 1x1 IPS screen, and this time they've even thrown in some fancy RGB. Now to know more about the Anbernic RG Cube, check out the link in the description below. So now coming back to the Xperia 1 Mark 6, is this phone a major improvement over the Mark 5? Sure, but at its current asking price, forget the Chinese competition, it costs more than the S24 Ultra or an iPhone 15 Pro Max. Now there are things I love about it. Sure, it's the last flagship to support microSD and a headphone jack. It's got excellent speakers, great battery life, it's very comfortable to hold, it's got an IP68 rating, wireless charging, that two-stage shutter key, and most importantly, excellent video quality. These almost make me want to overlook that price and the 1080p panel, but the middling low-light performance and throttling, they just can't be ignored. And for the asking price, the Xperia 1 Mark 6, it's hard to recommend. And that's my take on it. What do you think? Leave a comment. Ash out.